In 2006, Mission Impossible 3 marked a shift in the franchise. It brought emotional depth, personal villain, and J.J. Abrams' cinematic debut. But what most people don't know is that the version of Mission Impossible 3 that made it to the screens was the final product of years of chaos, failed visions, and scrapped scripts. At one point, David Fincher was set to direct. Then Joe Carnahan spent more than a year in deep development with an entirely different cast and tone. For a while, it looked like Mission Impossible 3 might never really happen. This is the untold story of the Mission Impossible 3 that never was, and how it nearly derailed the entire franchise. Coming off the commercial success but critical divisiveness of Mission Impossible 2, Tom Cruise and Paramount wanted a new direction. Woo's operatic slow-motion style and melodramatic tone had driven box office success, but it hadn't aged well, even by 2001. The plan was to strike fast. Cruise, through Cruise Wagner Productions, had a near total creative control, and was determined to continue the franchise with a new tone, new director, and a sharper narrative. He wanted the next mission to be smarter, grittier, and more grounded, and he had one name in mind: David Fincher. In early 2002, Fincher signed on. He was riding high off the success of Fight Club and Panic Room, known for his dark, meticulous style and obsession with psychological detail. But almost immediately, there was friction. Fincher's version of Mission Impossible was reportedly a paranoid thriller, less about gadgets and explosions, more about surveillance, betrayal, and psychological breakdown. He envisioned a story that pulled Ethan Hunt away from the action hero mold, placing him in a morally grey world of manipulation and control. Think more Jason Bourne than James Bond. Paramount balked. Cruise didn't see eye to eye on the scale. Fincher wanted to deconstruct the spy genre, and the studio wanted summer blockbuster returns. The creative gap was just too wide, and by the end of 2002, Fincher exited the project. It was the first major derailment, but it was far from the last. After reassessing, Cruise and Paramount decided to go a different direction. Fresh off the success of his indie breakout, Narc, Carnahan was seen as a gritty realist, a director who could ground the franchise and make it meaner. He was hired in 2003 and immediately began a deep rebuild. Unlike Fincher's cerebral detour, Carnahan's version leaned into geopolitical intrigue. According to Carnahan, his Mission Impossible 3 would have focused on arms trafficking, privatization of war, and the psychological toll of IMF operations. It would have had a sharper political edge, less globe-trotting fantasy, more 2000s cynicism, and the casting, wildly different. Kenneth Branagh was locked in as a villain, described as a sophisticated, cold-blooded antagonist with layers of charm and menace. Arianes had been cast as a fellow IMF operative, with a more hardened persona than the franchise had ever seen before. Scarlett Johansson, still in her early 20s, was brought in to play a younger agent, being mentored by Ethan Hunt. As the project developed, Carnahan even produced concept art, stunt pre-visualization, and extensive camera tests. Behind the scenes, reports mention an opening sequence in Berlin and a central chase set in the Vatican. It was ambitious, it was sharp, and it was never going to get off the ground. The script wasn't locked in, the tone was a point of conflict, and the studio had concerns about the marketability, rising costs, and the lack of a final shooting draft. This slowed momentum to a crawl. In August 2004, after nearly 15 months of work, Carnahan left the project. Another director down. At this point, Mission Impossible 3 had gone through 2 directors with clear visions, 2 years of development, and millions in pre-production. Cruise was still on board and wanted to drive forward the project, but it was adrift. Then came a bold idea. What if the franchise was reinvented by somebody not from the world of cinema, but from television? And so they made an unlikely choice. Enter J.J. Abrams. Abrams at this point was best known for Alias and Lost, shows that blended mystery, espionage, and deeply personal stakes. He pitched a more character-driven mission, one that put Ethan Hunt's personal life at risk. Gone were the geopolitical subplots. In came a story about love, loyalty, and what it means to be a spy trying to live a normal life. Abrams also brought in new collaborators, most notably Philip Seymour Hoffman as the arms dealer Owen Davian. Hoffman's villain was everything the franchise hadn't seen before: cold, understated, and terrifying. In just under a year, Abrams delivered the fully formed Mission Impossible 3. It hit theaters in 2006 and was a critical and commercial success, but it bore little to no resemblance to the film that had been developing since 2002. What would Fincher's Mission Impossible have really looked like? We can only guess. Likely, moody, visually striking, with long takes, meticulous compositions, and an Ethan Hunt that is struggling more with his inner demons than external threats. Carnahan's version, though, is better documented. Interviews reveal a brutal opening sequence, a subplot involving rogue CIA contractors, and a third-act betrayal by a close IMF teammate. His film likely would have been the grittiest mission to date. With handheld chaos, brutal hand-to-hand combat, and a darker tone, there was talk of Ethan Hunt being psychologically broken, forced to operate with minimal tech and under surveillance from his own government. Would it have worked? Maybe, maybe not. But it would have taken the franchise in a very different direction. One that may have aligned more closely with where Mission Impossible Fallout eventually ended up a decade later. Mission Impossible has become synonymous with large-scale practical stunts, global espionage, and a tireless Tom Cruise sprinting towards danger. But few realize how close the franchise came to collapse. If Abrams had not ended up helming Mission Impossible 3, but it had been Fincher or Carnahan, the whole series could have gone a completely different direction, towards something darker, more grounded, and more dangerous. Instead, their missions self-destructed before they even left the planning stage, making them truly impossible missions.